I told my coworker I had a work husband as a joke, and now my entire world views me as some unfaithful monster. They don't understand I was suffocating in my marriage, and that stupid label wasn't the affair, it was just the first crack I showed in public. David took Baxter and filed papers, my sister screens my calls, and my boss put me on probation. They all see me as the villain who destroyed a marriage for attention. What terrifies me is that the work husband wasn't even the real betrayal, just the version I let people see. The truth is so much more calculated. I'm going to tell you everything, especially about the text I sent at 2 a.m. on our anniversary, and why Baxter's microchip story isn't what you think. By the end, you'll understand why David had to leave, even if you hate me for it. David's startup ate him alive 3 years ago. I married a man who existed only in brief hallway crossings and shared takeout containers gone cold on the kitchen counter. He'd stumble in at midnight smelling of ambition and Red Bull, kiss my forehead while I feigned sleep, then vanish before my 6 a.m. alarm. I stopped being a wife and became a ghost who paid our bills and restocked the fridge. I tried talking to him about it once. During the 15 minutes, we both happened to be awake on a Sunday morning. He'd looked at me with this exhausted confusion, like I was speaking a language he'd forgot. "I'm doing this for us," he said, gesturing at our renovated kitchen, the Sub-Zero fridge he'd bought as a surprise that I hadn't wanted. I realized then that he was building a life around me, not with me. Marcus arrived in January, new senior developer with a laugh that filled our depressing open office. He noticed when I wore my hair differently. He remembered I hated cilantro. When David canceled our anniversary dinner for the 3rd year running, Marcus brought me a cupcake with a candle and said work spouses have to celebrate too. It felt harmless. A joke between two people who spent 10 hours a day debugging code and mocking our boss's obsession with agile methodology. I told myself this was what modern work friendships looked like. I started caring about my work clothes again. Not for David, he wouldn't notice if I wore a burlap sack, but for the way Marcus's eyes tracked me across the conference room. I told myself it was professional confidence. When he fixed my broken Python script at 9 p.m. while I sat on my couch in pajamas, sharing my screen and laughing about our terrible taste in sci-fi, I didn't see the boundary I'd erased. For the first time in years, I felt seen. After that, Marcus and I developed rituals. Coffee runs became our thing. We'd share earbuds to listen to new albums during late-night coding sessions. I knew his Chipotle order, he knew my Starbucks weakness for oat milk lattes with 2 pumps of vanilla. When David's goodnight texts stopped coming altogether, I didn't panic. I had Marcus sending me gifs of corgis doing karate at midnight. That phrase hooked into me like a fish on a line. I created a separate Slack channel just for us. Project Banter, I called it, making it sound professional. We complained about clients, dissected Marvel movies, and slowly I started venting about David. How he'd missed my promotion celebration. How he'd forgotten to sign the card for my dad's funeral. Marcus listened in a way David hadn't in years. He'd send sympathetic emojis and articles about emotional labor imbalance. It felt like therapy. Free therapy from someone who actually saw me. The first red flag waved when Marcus's wife called during our lunch. He silenced the phone without answering, caught my eye, and said she doesn't get the work stress. I should have asked what that meant. Instead, I laughed and showed him the passive-aggressive email David had sent about my unnecessary Christmas trip to see my mom. Marcus responded with a crying laughing emoji and said, "At least someone gets you." I started deleting our Slack messages. Not all of them, just the ones where I called David a successful stranger, and Marcus responded that I deserved better. I'd clear the channel history every Friday, telling myself it was about digital hygiene. When David's name lit up my phone, I'd silence it the way Marcus had silenced his wife's call. The parallel didn't occur to me, or maybe it did and I liked the symmetry, our boss noticed. "You two are joined at the hip," she said during my performance review, her tone light but her eyes sharp. I brushed it off. "We're just a good team." The lie came easily. Easier than admitting I'd rather spend 10 hours with Marcus than 10 minutes with my own husband. That was the moment I should have ended it, but instead I doubled down. I invited Marcus to a conference in Austin, just the two of us. For the project, I told myself, for the project. My actual manager, Jenna from HR, cornered me by the espresso machine the next day. "You're playing with fire," she murmured, watching Marcus demonstrate some new feature across the room. I rolled my eyes and said she was being paranoid. The words tasted metallic, like blood from biting my cheek. David found the text on a Tuesday, not the Slack messages, I'd purged those. But the real ones, the iMessages I'd been too careless to delete. He'd borrowed my laptop for a presentation when his crashed, and my phone had synced right there on the big screen in his home office. I was in the kitchen making the coffee I still didn't drink, but brewed every morning out of habit when I heard him say, very quietly, "What is this?" I knew before I turned around. The timbre of his voice had shifted into something broken. He'd found the message from 3 weeks prior, where I'd told Marcus about David's erectile dysfunction. I'd couched it as a stress-related problem, seeking Marcus's advice because he was a man, because he understood pressure. Really, I was just airing our dirty laundry to someone who would tell me I was too young to be in a sexless marriage. Marcus had responded with a long, sympathetic paragraph that ended with "You deserve to feel wanted." David stood there with my laptop open, that message blazing across his face like a scar. "You told him about our problems?" he asked, and the quietness was worse than shouting. I went on the attack immediately. "You weren't here to talk to," I spat, turning it back on him. The defensiveness poured out, hot and fast and utterly unhelpful. "You made me lonely." What I didn't tell him, what he wouldn't discover until later, was that I'd also sent Marcus a screenshot of David's calendar that night. The one showing his work dinner that I'd later learned was actually couples therapy he'd been attending alone for 6 months, trying to save our marriage without telling me. I told Marcus that David was busy again, painting myself as the abandoned wife while my husband was secretly doing the work I refused to acknowledge. David found that too eventually, but not that day. That confrontation ended with him slamming my laptop shut and walking out. No yelling, no tears, just the click of the front door and the silence that followed. I called Marcus immediately, which was my second betrayal. "He knows," I whispered into the phone, and Marcus said, "I'll be right over." I should have said no. I should have realized that a man willing to come to a married woman's house at midnight was not a friend, but I opened the door. We sat on my couch, not touching but close enough to feel the heat, and I let him comfort me while my marriage bled out in the next room. My neighbors saw his car in the driveway until 3 a.m. By Friday, the entire office knew. But that wasn't even the worst part. The day after David left, I went full scorched earth. I changed the Netflix password, took his name off our Costco membership, and posted a picture on Instagram of me and Marcus at a work function with the caption, "Grateful for partners who show up." Subtle enough to be deniable, pointed enough to wound. David responded by hiring a divorce attorney who specialized in high-conflict cases. I got the papers 2 weeks later, citing emotional abandonment and adultery. I laughed when I read adultery. We hadn't even kissed, I told my lawyer. Marcus and I were just friends. My lawyer, a woman named Claire with tired eyes, looked at me over her reading glasses and said emotional affairs are still affairs, especially when there's documented evidence of you undermining your husband. I fired her that afternoon, hired a shark who cost $600 an hour and promised he'd make David regret ever leaving. My biggest mistake came when I tried to get ahead of the narrative. I emailed David's mother, a woman who'd never liked me much, explaining that her son's workaholism had driven me into the arms of friendship. I laid out his hours, his absences, his failure to attend family events. I made myself the victim with surgical precision. What I didn't know was that David had already told her about the therapy he'd been attending, about how he'd realized his neglect and had been trying to reconnect. She forwarded my email to him with one line, "This is who she is." That email became Exhibit A in his case for full custody of Baxter. The dog had been my idea originally. I'd wanted a golden retriever puppy for our 5th anniversary, something to fill the silence. David had been indifferent, but Baxter became his shadow, his companion during those midnight work sessions when he'd come home and need someone happy to see him. I resented the dog for loving David more. When David moved out, he took Baxter for a walk and never came back. The microchip was in my name, I'd insisted on it, but David had the receipts showing he'd paid the vet bills for 3 years. My lawyer said it would be a fight. I told him to make it a war. The conference in Austin arrived like a car crash I'd arranged myself. Marcus and I shared a hotel, not the same room, but across the hall, which was a technicality that felt important at the time. We got drunk on overpriced margaritas and confessed everything. I told Marcus I was leaving David. He told me his marriage had been over for years. We didn't sleep together, but we talked until 4 a.m. about what our life could look like. He'd handle the tech, I'd handle the clients. A perfect partnership. In the lobby the next morning, a colleague from a rival firm saw us coming down for breakfast together, bleary-eyed and sharing a room key. The rumor mill exploded. By the time I got home, David had packed my things. He'd had the locks changed. I found this out when my key didn't work and I had to call him, standing on the porch like a stranger. Baxter's staying with me, he said, his voice flat. You can have the espresso machine. The absurdity of that offer, the way he valued our life together, made me scream at him through the door. Our neighbor filmed it. The video ended up attached to his divorce filing as evidence of my instability. I lost my job 2 days later. Not because of the affair rumors, though those didn't help. Because I'd been using company resources for my personal war. I'd printed David's therapy bills. Yes, I'd hacked his email, another detail I'd omitted from my sob story on the office printer. It had flagged it. When HR confronted me, I tried to spin it as gathering evidence, but Jenna from HR just shook her head. You brought your divorce into our workplace, she said, and escorted me out with a box of my things. Marcus kept his job. He stopped answering my texts by day 3. The narrative I'd crafted, lonely wife, neglectful husband, innocent friendship, collapsed completely when David's lawyer subpoenaed my search history. I'd Googled how to hide assets before divorce, 6 months before I ever told David about Marcus. I'd looked up emotional affair evidence admissibility before I'd even sent that first text to Marcus. I'd planned this entire arc like a chess game where I was both players and somehow still lost. The work husband comment hadn't been a slip. It had been a test balloon, a way to see how much I could get away with. David had recognized it for what it was, the first shot in a war I'd been planning quietly for years. My sister found out during a mediation session David invited her to. He'd brought a binder, color-coded, documenting every lie. The searches, the deleted messages, the Instagram post timed to hurt him, the email to his mother. My sister, who'd been my biggest defender, looked at me across the table and started crying. You weren't lonely, she said. You were manufacturing a reason to leave. She moved out of our shared apartment that weekend, blocked my number, posted on Facebook about family who betray you without naming names. Everyone knew. The therapist David forced me to see as part of the custody evaluation asked me directly, did you love Marcus, or did you love the chaos? I'd never been asked something so pointed. I opened my mouth to lie, to say it was real, that David had driven me to it, but what came out was worse. I don't know. She wrote that down. It became the headline of my evaluation. Petitioner admits emotional confusion, recommends against primary custody. Baxter's custody hearing was the final funeral. I'd brought his favorite squeaky toy, thinking the judge would see I was the one who knew his preferences. David's lawyer presented the microchip documentation, the vet bills, and then the nail A video of me yelling at Baxter for chewing my shoe 6 months prior. I'd forgotten about it. David hadn't. The judge awarded him full ownership, calling my relationship with the dog transactional. I cried in the courtroom, real tears for the first time through this whole disaster. Not for David, but for the dog who'd never really been mine. David posted a picture on Instagram 3 days after the ruling. Baxter in a field of grass, tongue lolling, looking genuinely happy. The caption read, sometimes the right decision hurts at first, grateful for second chances. His mother commented with a heart. My sister did too. The entire life I'd built had become a cautionary tale for other people to share and feel superior about. I'm telling you this now because yesterday I saw David walking Baxter near our old house. I was parked across the street, which sounds creepy, and it probably was. They both looked settled. Baxter didn't even glance my way when I whistled. David had his hand on the leash, not tight, just guiding, and the ease between them made something crack in my chest I didn't know was still whole. I wasn't supposed to be there. The restraining order he'd gotten after the conference incident prohibited me from coming within 500 feet, but I'd convinced myself that was just legal posturing. The truth, the one I've been circling this entire confession, is that I never wanted the dog. I wanted what the dog represented, something that loved David that I could take away from him. The work husband comment, the emotional affair, the conference, all of it was designed to create a weapon. But David disarmed me by letting go. He gave me what I thought I wanted, and in the taking, I destroyed the only thing that mattered, the possibility of being someone who deserved either of them. So here I am, in a studio apartment paid for with what little remained of my savings, holding Baxter's squeaky toy that the judge made me return but I stole from David's porch after the hearing. I still tell people when they ask what happened that it was a misunderstanding. That David was never around, that Marcus was just a friend. And in the darkest part of night, when I'm honest with the only person left to lie to, I admit that I got exactly what I engineered. I just didn't realize I'd be the one most destroyed by the explosion. You can judge me now. Everyone else does. The work husband thing. That was never the point. It was the excuse I gave myself to become the villain in a story where I could have just asked for a divorce like an adult. But asking would have meant admitting I was the one who'd given up years ago, and that was a truth I couldn't face until I'd lost everything I was trying to keep.